Hi, welcome back to another episode of the South Texas Power Hour. Matt Duke here from the Duke Law Firm. And with me today, I've got Alfred Mesquiti, who is a storyteller here in San Antonio in South Texas. And we've got a great episode here to talk about storytelling, pitch decks. These are the critical pieces, and I would say actually the most difficult pieces of being an entrepreneur and working in a startup. But Alfred, thanks so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me today. I'm really glad to be here.
So we always talk about the journey, and this is a great opportunity, especially for a storyteller. So tell us about how you became a storyteller, how you got involved with venture-backed companies.
Yeah, I think a lot of even entrepreneurs that I talk to sometimes mention how they fell into it. I, in many ways, also kind of fell into all of this. I would say, really, I got started in this almost 10 years ago. And what happened was, so I'm a San Antonio native, but growing up here, I went to, not to age myself, but I went to high school in the 90s. So, growing up here.
Hey, man, I did too. Yeah. Which high school, though?
I went to Central Catholic.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right, I went to Madison. So
okay,
we're
cool.
San Antonio boys.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So, but yeah, growing up here, San Antonio was not a place I ever imagined myself living in my adult life. It was that city where if you really wanted to do something with your life or, adopt a career, there wasn't a lot here that at the time that we felt San Antonio offered. So I was ready to get out of Texas. I went to California. I went to school out there in LA. And I lived in California almost 10 years also. After California, so I graduated and I was working in a marketing position for a large education company. I don't know if you know Kaplan. They're known for like test prep here.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I took that in some of either my MBA or my law. There was some test I took to prep me for sure.
Yeah. They have
a big old workbook. I remember it.
Yeah. And so before I was working for them, though, I was only really familiar with the test prep side of it. So they have a whole international arm, which is English programs. And so it was actually, so this is one of my first jobs out of college. I was working in downtown LA, very corporate, in a marketing and sales position. Basically, I was supporting all of our international sales managers.
Okay.
And so, the fun part of that job was I got to travel like everywhere. I went to Korea, I went to the UK. I was on these planes when I was in like my early 20s, and I hadn't ever been overseas or even really on a plane much in my life. So I got to see the world really early.
Wow.
I got kind of burned out really early, but
you learned the true definition of jet lag.
Yeah. It was a very busy job, but also very fun. It was a great work environment. There was like 5 or 6 different languages being spoken every day and around me, and it was something that I really enjoyed. But what made me kind of think of a different chapter was we acquired a competitor, but the integration of that competitor was more like the competitor acquired us, and so people were leaving. There was like a lot of the culture was getting bad. There was I knew it was time for me to kind of figure out what my next move was going to be. I worked with a lot of people who either had studied abroad or maybe they emigrated to the U.S. So a friend of mine was like, well, why don't you sort of consider like a gap year or something? And I'm like, well, yeah, that's great, but who can afford a gap year? Like I have bills to pay. And he's like, no, actually, there's this program that you might look into. It's in Japan. You teach English and you get paid to do it. And I was like, that sounds fun, but whatever. But I went to one of their informational sessions at the consulate, and it seemed interesting. It was a 1-year contract gig in Japan, and you get randomly placed. But it's like I was like, okay, well, I can kind of save money. Even LA is a really expensive city, and I can kind of go away and figure out what my next step in life is going to be.
Sure.
So got accepted to this program, went to Japan, got placed in a tiny fishing village about 80 miles from Tokyo. But I ended up staying in Japan for 4 years.
Oh, wow.
And Japan's an amazing place. I can't recommend it enough. It's very varied, even though it's a very small country, depending on where you go, very diverse in the food, the language, everything. And it was a great experience. I was there, so I left in 2011. I was actually there for the really big earthquake and everything.
Oh, yeah. The tsunami and
all
that? Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was a pretty... I don't want to say traumatic because I was lucky enough where I was there wasn't a lot of significant damage or anything, but that part of the experience also taught me a lot about I really should think about life. You think about life differently. You think about sort of what your values are and what you strive for in life. And so I finished that chapter in September of 2011. So about almost the end of the year.
Okay.
2011. And my plan was I'm going to move back to San Antonio for like a month. I'm going to visit family for a bit and figure out what my next step was. I knew basically, though, that I couldn't really go back to corporate life after, I was traveling everywhere. I was living abroad. I didn't see myself in like what we define as like this 9 to 5, although it's not really that for anyone anymore. But I was like, well, what can I do that I think might be fulfilling and might challenge me in work, especially with this next chapter. And, really in doing my own research and kind of figuring out what that was, something about startups and tech really attracted me, but I didn't know what exactly. And my background is marketing and business development. So I was like, well, I'm not an engineer. I'm not
You're a tech guy.
Yeah,
I'm not
really
going to sit there and code all day.
Yeah, it was like I'm not really a tech dude, and I even if I wanted to, I could probably. I don't think I would enjoy like coding all day, but
Right.
I was like, well, I'm going to figure it out. So came to San Antonio. I was like dreading coming back home, but San Antonio in 2011 was very different from San Antonio in 1999 when I left. And so
There was no Pearl.
yeah, well, true.
That was where the homeless people were. I remember 99.
And the Pearl had just opened, I think, when I moved back.
Yeah, in 2011.
And so, discovered this city that was a little bit different. Also, I was older and everything, so it was a little bit different than what I had left.
Right.
And was like, well, good base for me to kind of figure things out. And I was like, even if I start a new business, Texas has really great, we don't have a sales tax or we don't have an income tax.
Right.
It's a cheap base for me to, save money and try to.
Especially compared to California.
Exactly. Figure out what that next step is going to be. And, but I was still like set on either moving to Austin or to like the Bay Area.
Okay.
Because I was like, well, that's probably where the startup, scene is. And then I happened to be like looking online and saw this, it was an announcement for like, I forget the name of it. It was one of those, it was San Antonio New Tech. That's what it was.
Oh, okay.
And it was just, reading about, learn about, new business ventures or people, meet founders who are running businesses in San Antonio. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And, where is it? And it said Geekdom.
Okay.
And so I was like, what is this place, Geekdom? And I found the website and it was like, Geekdom's a place where entrepreneurs come together and founders and we're doing cool stuff. And I was like, this place sounds interesting. I've never heard of it. And so went down to Geekdom, which I didn't realize had really just opened.
Yeah, I was going to say, wow,
months.
that would have been right at the time.
Yeah, a couple months prior at the Weston Center.
Yeah.
And the moment I walked in, though, I was like, this place is amazing. And, just seeing sort of like kind of the image you have of tech and startups, like the cool stuff back then, like Geekdom did evoke a lot of that.
Right.
But the other side of it was I feel like I fit here, even if I don't know what it is that I'm doing here. And so I was like, well, let me just be a sponge. And I was reading a lot of books at the time about startups and entrepreneurship, venture capital. They had just started I think it was their first or their second cohort of Techstars Cloud at the time. And one of the great programs that, I don't know if it's Techstars thing or it was something that Geekdom wanted to adopt, but it was something called Techstars for a Day. And basically you could sign up and you would get like a little ticket and you didn't have to be part of Techstars. You could just participate like as an observer.
Oh, wow.
So went and, it was sort of like an open house. And so I got to talk with like all the founders, all the VCs that were there, everyone connected to the startup community that I had, at that time I was like reading about a lot of this stuff. I had read about Techstars, but I was like, wow, I'm like actually here, like talking to people who are running businesses and, this is really cool. And, and just talking and networking and meeting people like this, you meet a lot of really cool, brilliant people who are working on cool stuff.
Right.
And that's what really, I started learning about how it is they raise capital. And it's, pitch decks and pitching. And
right.
And so, again, I even joined like, startup competitions, 3-day startup, all this stuff, just to really learn all of that. But, you're kind of immersed in this world on a daily basis and you start to, you learn the jargon, you really learn how everything operates. But part of that, going to these events, meeting all these founders, learning about the process, I realized that a lot of them, really smart people doing cool stuff, but they don't really communicate it very well.
Right.
And, a lot of these are really high stakes conversations where they're trying to raise money, to fund their dream, basically. And my background in sales, I used to build a lot of presentations. I was in PowerPoint a lot. And I even used to get compliments from like colleagues like, oh, this on the visual basis, like
Sure.
this presentation looks great. Graphic design for me was always a hobby. I was playing in Photoshop since I was like in high school, but it was never anything I pursued professionally. But so I remember something clicked where I was at one of these startup competitions and a friend of mine was pitching, and it was just really boring, death by PowerPoint looking, presentation. And I happened to be reading at the time of, other startups a lot of startups that like, some of them that go under, they like to share a lot of their insights. And so I think on Crunchbase, they used to have this section where, some that went under, they shared everything, including like the pitch deck. And so I was like,
oh, wow.
I was studying these.
Well, there's a little nugget right there.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
had no idea that existed.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Crunchbase, but I didn't know that portion of it.
Yeah. And I was, honestly, you learn so much from failure. It's like,
It's true.
Yeah. And it's part of the iterative process, right?
Right.
And but I learned so much about pitch decks and how they're made and what these components are that I was like, hey, at least on the visual side, like I can work on making this stuff look a little bit better. And so I was terrified because I was like, I've never done anything like this professionally. I'm not a graphic designer. Like, what do I say? But friend of mine, I was like, send me the deck and let me kind of work on it. And just kind of played with it and was kind of studying the way some of these other pitch decks looked. And I was like, I can make this look a little bit better. And so handed it off to him and he was like, oh, actually this looks really good. And I think it's helped me in my conversations. And so at that point for me, I should have done like a ton more validation study, but I was like, okay, this is what I can do. Like I'm going to help you like create a better looking deck and pretty up the sides and whatever. And so of course though, I'm very like self-conscious, also very introverted. So I was like, I can't tell Geekdom or anyone at Geekdom really what this is because I'm going to be laughed out of the building. And so I kind of went stealth and I went on like Upwork, or it was Odesk at the time, and was like, let me see if I can get gigs. And so I started to actually get some traction there. And I was like, okay, people want to work with me. And these really early decks, if I look at them, I would probably laugh. But it's like I was able to help people tell that story better, even if it was me just sort of focusing on the visuals and the way the slides looked. And fast forward a little bit more, where I got more confident and I was like, let me start, seeing if I can get local clients here. I'd built a website and I was actually getting some clients like from California that were just like, hey, can you do this deck work? And I realized that there's this whole industry devoted to that. But I was like, well, I still don't feel like I could, even as a side business do this, because to me, it was like, this is not really fully, I didn't feel confident in it. And so, I remember I made a sign one night and it just said like in big font, it was like, show me your deck. and it was like my contact information. And I put these signs all around Geekdom. And I was like, let me just see what comes out from there. And actually,
guerrilla marketing.
Yeah. It was guerrilla marketing. And actually, a couple days later, I got my first client like locally, which was, I don't know if you know Chad Keck with Promoter.io, but
Yeah.
They were in a raise at the time, and he reached out and was like, hey, I'd love to have a conversation. And so, one, I was like thrilled that I actually got like a response, but also I was terrified.
Right.
And but went in there, met with Chad. Chad, he's a great guy, and was like, okay, like this is a business, and I can work on this. And in working on that too, though, I realized that apart from the graphic side of it, which is really what I was going to try to build everything on, I realized that it's these conversations you have about the business, about the venture, and what they're working on, that's really where a lot of the value is. And
Right.
It's really where I think a lot of the work needed to be done of helping them articulate what it is that they're working on and helping them connect that better with their target audiences.
Right.
And, again, my background, which is not really graphic design, it was more on the business side of things. I was like, well, maybe I can try to leverage that. And, meeting with some founders who were maybe looking for a designer, but telling them, hey, design's fine, but actually think that let's try to focus a little more on the content side first. And so, really, it was A/B testing. It was a lot of iterating on my part, a lot of learning. I was reading tons of books. I was immersing myself in the whole, storytelling, presentations, pitch deck world. But at that point, that's where I was like, I'm getting clients. I'm getting good referrals. I even got some like through Geekdom. I worked with like Lorenzo Gomez also at the time, who was the chairman of Geekdom and helped Geekdom tell their story better. And was getting a lot of great feedback and a lot of great compliments on my own work that I was like, this is something that people need, and I think I can really offer this. And so that's where I was like, my business, I'm going to call it DeckSavvy because I couldn't really think of anything else. But started kind of
Come on, there was more than just that.
Well,
You're a marketing guy. It seems very purposeful as opposed to accidental.
Yeah, although I'm on every mailing list for like wooden decks, like building decks. But
that's true. If I've got to build a deck, do you do that as well?
No, I don't. But I think a lot of people think I do at the beginning.
Yeah.
But so yeah, like that's where I started building the brand around it.
Right.
And fast forward a little bit more, a couple of years, in the geekdom scene, entrepreneurial scene, which was only growing at the time. I realized there's a whole other side to it, which is the VC side.
Yep.
And for me as a contractor, as a freelancer and a solopreneur, when you're dealing with startups, especially early stage, a lot of times they don't really have budgets. And so I was like, well, there's still the problem.
Yes, as a startup lawyer, I know that as well.
So I was like, how am I going to eat and
Right.
still kind of do this work? Because I was really enjoying it, but I was like still figuring out what that model was and everything. But I realized that VCs were they have a whole portfolio of startups that need help.
Yeah.
And usually these are a little bit better funded and they, the model's going to work a little bit better. And so I realized also VCs and accelerator programs is where I could really get in because one, it was a lot of these, jobs or gigs or something that usually if there's one that you do well, like they're going to refer you out and it's this network of people that are looking for something like that. And I also in the process, I learned the whole other side of venture capital and how it works, and saw these high stakes conversations up front and center.
Yeah.
And so networked more with like VCs, and especially locally, and that's how I met Pat with Active Capital, and Kat and the team, and so worked with them for several years until about 2020 or so, where it made a lot more sense for me to kind of come on board with that team. And I would say that now, like 80-90% of my day is really on our portfolios at Active, and doing the same thing though, which is what I love. And it's the storytelling. It's helping them put their decks together, helping them refine that story, that narrative, and tell it in a way that's going to resonate with target audiences, which in this case is investors.
Right.
And hopefully secure that funding.
Well, let's jump into that. So. We talked about pitch decks, and for anybody that's raising capital, whether you know it at the beginning, you know it pretty quick that the pitch deck is something that is like a centerpiece to that. But before we get there, because so many people do what, quite frankly, I've done in the past is, you need a pitch deck? Okay, here you go. But that's not actually where it begins. Let's kind of rewind to where it really should begin with the story.
Yes.
How important is the story to a company that's seeking to raise funds from investors, whether it's venture-backed, friends and family? How important is the story?
I would say, honestly, the story is everything. The pitch deck is a tool that helps you, get your foot in the door. It also helps you communicate some of this information more efficiently. There's elements of the story that also can be actually, translated into a slide or a couple of slides within the deck.
Right.
But the story itself should start as a separate element because the story really is what gives the deck some life and identity, especially when you're there to pitch it live. I think every founder needs to be comfortable pitching without slides at all. And I always tell founders, especially the ones that like want to go into like video demos and like all of these like live, sales demos or something like that of how it works, which is great. But I tell them was like, what if, the power goes out and you're stuck with nothing?
Right.
What are you going to talk about? How are you going to pitch this? And so that's a great exercise for founders because they start to figure out how story and narrative really works in tandem with the deck. The visual example I use is that it's like a thread that you weave throughout the deck itself, because you can, if you look up like pitch deck template or something, you can find like a whole guide and a whole set piece of slides, like your go to market slide or your validation studies, market research, the problem solution, all this stuff, which every pitch deck needs to have, but if you think also in terms of, if you put yourself in the shoes of a VC who's seeing, tons of decks in a week, what's gonna make it stand out a little bit more? that's where you try to bring in some of the story. Apart from the visuals, try to bring in some of the story and try to tell it in a way that's going to resonate on their side, where they can identify with that pain that you're solving or the solution that you're working on.
So what are the story, people go, all right, I have a company, it's a software company. There's not really a story there. But they don't really realize, just in the fact of the way they're identifying a problem, there's a need for that, and then they have a solution with a product, with a fit.
Yeah.
That in itself is a story, right? But that's not how founders think. They think technical. They're so much into the trees.
Yeah.
And maybe even all the way down to the grass that they're planting a tree,
Sure.
that they don't back up to the forest and really see the greater part that they're playing. So what are the type of stories out there that a founder, that exist in most of these companies that maybe a founder can start to think about what they do in those terms?
Yeah, that's a good point, because when we talk about story or narrative, it's actually a collection of different types of stories. One book that I could really recommend is Get Backed.
I have it.
Okay,
It's a great book.
Get Backed is, I highly recommend that book because it's one of the best reference pieces on pitch decks as well as story. And it even covers like the graphic and the visual side of things. Provides some great examples. It's the first book I usually recommend to a founder when we're having this discussion. But they also break down the story aspect into four key stories. Usually the first one, and the one that's going to flow most easily, is the founder story. And why that's important is because, like you mentioned, they get lost in the forest or even the grass, and they're working on this so much that they sometimes will overlook or forget why they're working on it in the first place. And so asking a lot of these why types of questions, like why do you wake up every day to work on this? What got you started on this path? Every founder takes the road less traveled. And so the way that you can start, again, to identify some of those story and narrative elements, particularly in your founder story, is you didn't settle for the status quo. You were presented with an option to either accept the way things are, or to try to solve this problem that faced you in a novel and innovative way. And really that framework, it's not something I made up. It's
Right.
very close to The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, which is a great rubric that you can apply to a lot of your founder stories. And the founder story can be very powerful because it shows why not only did you decide to take the road less traveled and decide to go down a different path that others hadn't taken, but you survived it. So you slayed the demons, you killed the dragon, whatever metaphor you want to use. But not everyone survives it. I'm not saying they die, but like not everybody. You may attempt to go down this path and you never really solve the problem, or you run out of runway or resources. But there's those that survive and they live to tell the tale. And so they come back with all of this knowledge and insight gained, and they're like, hey, I want to change the world now and make this better for everybody. And so with that type of passion, when you really write that down and start to really think about it that way, you realize that this is something that when you're telling this story to other people, they're going to identify with it. Even if they don't know exactly the industry or the features of your product, they're going to identify with the story because they're like, hey, that's pretty cool. Or, hey, I'm familiar with that problem, or I've had it myself, or a friend of mine, they deal with this every day. What you're working on is cool. Tell me more. And so again, it just starts to help facilitate that conversation. Stories at their core are conversations.
Right.
And some of our most famous works of literature started as stories, and they're thousands of years old, generations. So when you think about story that way too, it's extremely powerful. And when you apply it to pitch decks or pitching or raising capital, story can be extremely effective when you know how to discover it that way and apply it.
What do you see? Kat's been here on the podcast. It's one of our favorites. When we talked about how venture capitalists select founders or companies, which one is it? Do they pick the company or the horse, or do they pick the founder, which is the jockey?
Yeah.
Analysis. She was crystal clear. They pick. It's got to be a good horse, but they pick the jockey, right? They pick the founder. It's got to be a good company. It's got to show the metrics they want. But there's a lot of those companies out there. It really comes down to the founder.
Sure.
How important is it for a founder to be an excellent storyteller of their story? From the VC side, since that's now what you're doing a lot with.
Sure.
How do you see those differences?
I would say it's extremely important. Part of it is, and yeah, to Kat's credit, it has to be a good horse, right?
Yeah.
But the horse can completely iterate into like a camel or something by the end
Sure.
of it. So.
Which camels are durable, so
yeah, it's true.
So.
And they might be better at whatever it is you're working on. But
That's right.
They also come with their own
That's
portable
right.
water tank.
That's right.
So that might be applicable, but it's true because I think the jockey or the founder is the most important aspect, and for them to be able to tell that story and articulate it very clearly is probably their greatest tool they can use, because especially at the early stages, they may not have the model figured out. They may not have everything completely figured out, and they most likely are going to be iterating. Some of them pivot really hard. Some of them, they'll just iterate a little bit along the path. But some of those hard pivots, the way they're still supported by their VCs and their network is because they understand, the VCs understand that these founders are visionary and they trust them to explore that process more. And they also trust that they're going to be able to navigate those choppier waters.
Right.
Because not everything's rosy in VC or in startups. I think we all know this. And so these conversations and these stories, if you look at it also, another good analogy is, VCs or investors, they're not buying your product or service. It's more like dating. They're investing in you and your team. And so it's a relationship. And so if you're able to, again, clearly articulate your goals and your vision and what it is that you want to do with this venture that you're working on, you build a lot of trust and rapport early on. And you're able to have people rally behind your cause, even if that means that things may need to pivot or change down the road. So I would say it's extremely important. You really start with your story. Everything else is something that you can start to build on top of that. It's only going to make it better. But not only you as the founder have to be able to tell that story, but everyone on your team should be telling the same story.
Well, and so that led perfectly to what I was going to ask you next, which is, how does culture of a business play into the story?
I would say culture plays a lot. Culture really speaks to a lot of your values, whether it's personal or those that you or professional values that you want to instill in the company.
Right.
That speaks to a lot of your founder and origin story. Another story is your customer story. So customers are your evangelists, and customers also, they're very brand loyal. Think about a company like Patagonia. I use that as an example because they're an outdoor company. They have a lot of outdoor camping, things of these types of products. But they have a really loyal customer base because they're very committed to the environment, the earth. And they're very vocal and clear in all of that in their communications. And so this is how you keep customers informed. This is how you define who are these target customers that you want. But apart from customers, this is also people that will rally behind the cause and want to work for you. And so you can build your team that way. If you don't really have stories to tell as you're trying to build these aspects of the company, you may run into some problems because that means that things aren't really clearly defined. And so if you start working on these stories earlier, and it'll help you define really what are these values that you and your company stand for. Who are the employees that you want to work with? Who are your partners, other stakeholders, customers? But it really helps you start to build and elaborate on things and to really define what that company is that you want to build.
So does your mission, vision, values, which some founders know what that is. Some founders find that when it comes to their story. How does that come into play? Do you see the story? Do you see a founder that comes in with strong mission, strong vision of what they want? Do you see them better able to tell their story versus those that don't? So is that something that you see?
So, visionary founders, I would say, are extremely effective at telling that story. And I think every founder should be visionary in one aspect or another. Although vision, it's extremely important in a pitch deck as well. And vision ties into, there's another story, and these are all from Get Back. So like, it's not me, creating these, but the venture growth story, which is a lot of where you talk about insights that you learned in solving this problem for yourself, and how you're applying it to the business and how the business can grow and scale.
Right.
A lot of times you can start to bring vision into that. And the way I counsel founders on vision is, the way you talk about vision is, step outside of what you're working on today. Think about 5 years, 10 years down the road where maybe the solution's fully implemented. Maybe it's working. Maybe you got all the customers and made all the revenue that you were that you're projecting.
Right.
What problems are you solving then? What customers are you dealing with then? How is your business growing, evolving, and still staying relevant? That's where they can start to build on vision. So think of someone like Elon Musk,
right.
who, he's working on tons of these different projects like Tesla and SpaceX and everything. But his ultimate vision is to get people to Mars.
Right.
And starting out with that type of vision, it's a huge, lofty vision. It can be a little bit dangerous, because when you start out with this really long vision, you have to still be able to connect the dots,
right.
And say, we want to get people to Mars, but this is how we're going to do it. And today we're working on XYZ.
Right.
And so for founders, that's a way to kind of dial it back a little bit. And depending on the stage they're in or what they're working on, still be able to talk about the business today, but tie in that vision for down the road. Because again, vision is where someone can get extremely passionate. Again, this is also where you can help build some of that relationship, and certain VCs will really resonate with that vision conversation. So be a visionary, but
right.
be able to connect the dots and tie it back to what.
Well, and again, the story's audience, from a, connection moment, passion, right? That hero story is what pulls out the emotions of the listener in whatever format there is. Pitch deck, you're pitching customers, right? They engage in that hero story to say, oh, I align with whatever it is mission you are on, the purpose you have. The venture-backed one is that next level as an economic standpoint of, okay, I'm looking for a 10X. All right, so now I'm already tied into how, I'm passionate you are. I'm passionate about that. But passion without, an economic return, my investors don't, they're not happy with that. I can't just invest wherever I would do good, or I'd be called a nonprofit.
Sure.
But that second story, or actually the third story, to be able to show, oh, okay, now I see, taking Elon Musk, if it's to go to Mars, Tesla, battery technology, you're not going to have gas in Mars for that sort of thing. The Boring Company.
Sure.
I'm going to have to not be underground and live how to, to move these tunnels. SpaceX, I got to get there, right? Everybody can see how those pieces fit to aspects of going and staying to Mars, which is where, he would want to go. It tells that story perfectly.
Sure.
Even though maybe we only connect with different parts of, the hero story of let's go to space. I don't know how you connect to the hero story of Boring Company, but there might be one there. But
find it.
It's very interesting how, when you really peel back and look through the lenses of these different story types, we see those in very successful people. Steve Jobs, he would take a company, Apple, to extraordinary heights. He would be pushed away. That same company would then start to plummet.
Yep.
It would come back and then take it even further than it's ever been. And, they've continued on that journey that he put them off with.
Sure.
But even with Pixar, when he was in that part, he still saw a greater vision with technology and where it was going to go on this whole thing, using technology to change the world, essentially.
Absolutely.
And how we live.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's just fascinating how, all those story types, they're just everywhere.
Yeah.
We just don't really look for them, but we feel them. We know them.
Sure.
So let's talk about a pitch deck, because that's usually, again, where everybody starts is, oh, I need a pitch deck. But as we've just talked about, a pitch deck has certain, elements which you've briefly touched on, but that story, if it's missing, it's just a piece of paper.
Sure.
What are the key exercises that you would recommend a founder in preparation of their pitch deck? Maybe let's start with story aspects and then get more technical when we get there. What are some exercises they can do? And it's like, I got to do a pitch deck. What's that first step?
I think every founder is familiar with the idea of the elevator pitch. So
Okay.
it's, say you're in an elevator and in walks in like Mark Cuban or one of these, top VCs, and you have like 3 minutes max to tell them what it is you're working on. Go through that exercise and try to see how much of what it is that you're working on or that you're building you can communicate in that short of a time without sounding like it's rushed and without sounding long-winded. That really, when you give them those types of parameters, it's going to light a fire under somebody and really help them start that process of honing it down and also getting things out of all the jargon and out of the out of their head a little bit. The other one I tell them is, pretend I'm your grandmother. Tell me what it is that you're working on. Tell me the problem that you're solving. Again, it makes them have to take a little bit step out. And the reason I give them these exercises is because, at the early stages, these conversations, especially when you're trying to raise money, you're usually going to be talking to people who are also very close to that industry or closer to understanding what it is that you're working on, the problem. But as you go further, especially as you go further rounds, this audience starts to get broader, and so you're more challenged to be very clear in telling that story, but also being very clear in the language that you're using and the way that you're describing the problem, the solution,
right? Everything,
because people need to get it and they need to get it quick. And if you start, if you open with we are, XYZ app and these are all of our features, there's nothing there. Even if I understand, the app or it's something that I would use, cool, that sounds interesting, but it's not something that's sticky. It's not something that someone's going to really remember. And again, these are relationships that you're building. So you want to remember the founder. Obviously you want to remember what they're working on,
right?
But you also definitely want to remember the founder. And that's where I challenge all the founders at the beginning to start. And again, the founder story, that's really one of the first stepping stones of building some of these stories and extracting some of these stories is, why did you get started? Tell me why you wake up every day to do this. After that, then it's okay, well, talk about your first customers. What do they love about what it is that you have done for them? How would they tell their friend about your business? And think about it that way. Try to actually interview those customers. Find out what their experience was. You have a great customer story now, and that's just something that you can start to incorporate not only in your pitch deck, but also your marketing or communication materials. Think about the industry. I don't think we talked about this one, but that's the industry story. Who are your competitors? People are solving this problem one way or another, whether those are your direct competitors or whether they're the indirect competitors who are maybe taking 6 steps to do it where you can do it in 2 steps or something. But what does that landscape look like? And especially if you are a very disruptive solution,
right?
Which for founders, they're really thrilled. They're like, we're the only one doing this. We're going to destroy the competition. But to an investor, that's extremely high risk,
right?
And
it's why is nobody else?
Yeah, it's going to make them nervous. And so ask the question, why is nobody doing it this way?
Right.
Either it's because you're extremely innovative or you're looking at the wrong problem or the wrong aspect of it. And that's your industry story. Tell that story and describe what that landscape looks like and describe why your solution is still novel among everyone else, all the other players in the space. Before even starting with the deck, I just tell them to write it down and get some of these ideas down and start to let's form a narrative from there. A lot of times it can be just one page, but you can tell a really effective brand story and the story of your business. And from there, we can start to build a powerful deck that's going to go a little bit deeper into all of these elements.
So I'm not going to say what. I'll just kind of name it. One of the biggest things I see in working with startups is the deck themselves. They miss the purpose of the deck. They see the deck as, I guess, a couple of different ways they see it. They see the deck as a who am I company. This is what we do, which is great. It is a part of it.
Yes.
But it's informative. That's how they see it. Or they see it of gimme. I need X. I need Y. I need Z. And not a mixture of this, it's just, I need to basically put out what I'm asking for. Then, sometimes you see, the ones that are all over the place that just want to talk about what they've done in the past. And it's more of I would say a success video, that you're going to listen to. But they miss the fact that the sole purpose of the deck is to get interest in their ask of whatever it is they're doing. And there's a process of certain elements that over time, just through practice, that venture capitalists, funders of whatever sort want to know as basics. But the point of that deck is to get to them to the next conversation,
Yes.
which is a deeper dive into what they're doing and then trying to close a deal, to get funding.
Sure.
They miss the sales process part of this, which
Sure.
sales process sometimes is a word nobody likes. Shoot, but that's what it is. Fundraising is just selling part of your company with a nice little fun term there, but they miss that part of marketing and what it is to get interest and then to convert that interest into actual funders.
Sure.
Give me any examples of those, any things, to share around that and the process of pitch decks and pitching?
Yeah, I would say that it depends a lot on the stage, but your traditional deck, like you always want to aim for brevity, and so usually, unless it's maybe it's like in like med tech or these really these industries that may require a lot more, your core deck should still be, I would say, around 12 slides or so.
Okay.
And you want to cover the bases, like we mentioned, of like, what is that strategy for you to get your first customers or the go-to-market? What does your pricing model look like? How are you making money? Like, you need to really clearly define those in a deck. But you also, the problem and the solution sometimes is the most overlooked aspect I've seen, where overlooked in a way where if I'm looking at a deck, like I want to know really quickly what it is, what that problem is and how you're solving it.
Right.
I've seen some decks where like it's like slide 15 and they're still not really.
Because it's an engagement, right?
Yeah.
You got to hook me at the beginning so that way my eyes don't glaze over for the 7 minute, which it's 5 or 7 minutes. I've heard some are 3.
Yes.
Between 3, let's say 3 and 10 minutes. If you don't hook them at the beginning, next.
Exactly.
They're waiting for the next one.
Yeah. A caveat though is, and the reason I mentioned stage is like, suppose take a step back and it's actually earlier than that.
Sure.
Where we still want to know what the problem is, but maybe you are, again, this is about relationships, but maybe you're a founder who had 1 or 2 successful exits and you're working on your next idea. So you still need to clearly articulate what that problem is you're setting out to tackle and how you think it's going to work. Maybe that's all they have right now, but you will probably still get a lot of interest and even VC money with a very small kind of teaser deck at that point.
Because the jockey has proven he can ride the horse.
So there's a lot behind it already.
Right.
But outside of that type of example, the more standard deck is going to be that longer one where probably the VC doesn't know you or only knows you from like an introduction. And the deck needs to be a tool for you to be able to communicate a lot of this information when you aren't even there. Typically in the process, you may have an intro or phone call, email, whatnot, and the VC will be like, send me your deck. And so this deck that you send is also, so another key point is your deck is a living and breathing entity. It's a tool, but you should always tailor it to your audience. And that means that the one that you're sending ahead of time is going to be different from the one you're presenting. It's the same information overall, but the one that you send is something that someone's going to be reading. Right. So you can pack a little bit more information in there. You don't want to make it too busy, but it's a reference piece, and it's something that needs to be able to do the job for you when you're not there. So that's an extra challenge. But then when you present, you still want to cover a lot of these points, but keep in mind that they've looked at it, and they probably have some questions already.
Right.
So anticipate what those questions are, and when we look at from a slide basis, try to focus on those key points and keep it high level and keep it simple, but you're there to really put your face and to again start to tell that story better, to show how all of this technical information that you presented, how it fits into what it is you're working on, and how you can make that better case for them to partner with you and to rally behind your cause.
Which is interesting because some people ask for video pitches, so that way they can cut through the chase, right? I don't want to have to book an hour-long or a 30-minute meeting with somebody. Yeah, send me your pitch deck, make it no more than 5 minutes video, and I'll take a look at it. Well, now I can look at 20 in the morning versus 2.
Sure.
So it's fascinating that you say that, which leads to the point of it's an iterative process, and the pitch deck itself is actually a variety of tools that are communicating what you need to. And I've talked to founders in the past that have done pitch competitions, for non-dilutive money, and they've pitched for friends and family. They've pitched for VCs. They've gotten on TechCrunch, and pitched on a large. We've even had San Antonio companies pitch on Shark Tank. The pitch is there, but the presentation of it is slightly different. But I guess I'll go back is that story's still the same, isn't it?
Yeah.
No matter where I'm pitching, no matter what I'm using as my tool, that story should be consistent.
Yeah, and the story again should be everything that you start from.
Right.
Obviously, I myself have challenges in actually presenting it. I work on presentations all day, and I hate giving them still. I'm very much a person who likes to be behind the scenes, like in the background of things. But for founders, like you're pitching all the time, so it's something that you should naturally start to get used to. And if you're not, start getting used to it today, because they're pitching all the time, whether they realize it or not.
Right.
And also your actual delivery and your presentation skill and your stage presence, all of these other aspects of just presenting in general are things too that you should work on. I mean, like you mentioned, Shark Tank, they all sort of follow a kind of similar presentation style. But then look at like TED Talks. That's another presentation style. And
it's very much story based.
Yeah, and even the way they tell that story is going to be different. Look at the slides they use; they're very different than what you would see like in a pitch deck, right? But again, if you just listen to these, they all start with a story, and there's a lot of shared elements among them that you can identify. And so those shared elements are really where that key story exists, and it's again that should be driving every aspect and every method you're using to tell that story and to communicate it.
So we've talked about the story, which is the core, right? Then we've talked about the pitch deck. We talked about some of the content. Get Backed, great resource, literally details what those typical slides look like. But let's talk about another thing that I'm sure you see a lot. In fact, we've been at a group together with an accelerator that would just kind of scream to you is the visuals and the way the deck looks and how important that really is to really completing the pitch deck. Can you talk a little bit about some of those challenges that you see founders deal with? Because they're not graphic designers. Yeah. They may get the story right, they may get the content right, but those visuals, talk about those.
And I'll tell you, visuals, that's really where I started in building this business. And that's really where I thought all of it was. And visuals still, it's an extremely important and relevant part of the deck. But you want to avoid is like lipstick on the pig, which is, make sure that we're starting from a good spot. So do all of that work to make sure the story is defined and that we're actually, we have these key slides really figured out. On the graphic side of things, again, founders may get really apprehensive because they're like, well, I'm not a designer, I don't have time to do this. But you don't have to be a designer to create some well-crafted, visually compelling slides. Less is more is always something that you want to define. So a lot of times we'll start with slides that are death by PowerPoint. There's like 18 different bullet points or something.
Right.
Try to get it down to 3 to 5 bullet points. I mean, that's what bullet points are. They're summarized ideas.
Right.
You don't have to throw the kitchen sink in a slide. If anything, you can split it up into 2 or 3 slides. I try not to tell founders to stick to like a slide number, even though a good deck's going to have about 10 to 12 slides. We want to keep it brief.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that you can't have like 30 slides in the appendix.
Sure.
Doesn't mean you have to show it to everybody, but certain questions may arise where you're like, hey, this is actually, let me show you this. And you can go a little bit deeper into things.
Right.
But so start there. So try to do less is more. The other thing is, even when I look at decks and I'm trying to update them visually, look at these bullet points again, because the bullet points, they should be summarized ideas. And I look at it and it's like, well, what's a visual way that I could communicate this? So if I'm talking about, I don't know, like driving or something, maybe find a picture of a car and put it there. Or maybe if you have a little bit more, and there's a lot more tools available these days that, you can go to like an icon library and maybe just use an icon to celebrate to communicate some of this stuff. And so from that point, you actually start to think a little bit more visually, and it helps you figure out how to start laying out this information on the slide. The other thing is, even if it's text, text can be extremely powerful, and your copy can be really powerful as long as it's summarized. So, especially the statement, or the problem statement, where even if we don't have design skills, like if you can define the problem in like a sentence, like the hotel industry is broken, or some of these really big, broad, bold statements. Airbnb solved that problem, right? So just put that on the slide by itself.
Right.
Like that already is a well-crafted slide, and it's completely to the point and will spell out what it is of the problem. You can further articulate it in a separate slide if you'd like, or maybe something that you want to speak to. That's where you sort of define what goes on the slide, what actually are they going to be seeing or reading, and then what also goes into my spoken pitch. So if you're presenting this live or over Zoom, always keep in mind that the moment you throw a slide up there, your audience is going to start reading.
Right.
And at that point, they start to tune you out.
Right.
And it's natural. It's going to happen to anyone. But try to keep them corralled in, well, if they're going to be reading, this is what I want them to see. And so,
well, and it's a great point you brought up earlier is if the pitch is going ahead of you, you may have two different pitches, right? Because, I mean, I've seen pitches that are very detailed, but I can actually just see the pitch and know I don't need to hear them speak. But if I use that same one and hear different verbal content coming out of them, but the text is up there, you're right. I missed the verbal.
Sure.
And which can be even more powerful than just reading it. That's there.
And anticipate some of the questions. And, a smart founder may actually, what they send ahead of time is going to provoke a certain question that they want to answer when they're presenting live, right?
Right.
And they may show them something that wasn't in that deck. I'm not saying that you're like sending them something that's going to be completely opposite,
right?
But you want to control that conversation as much as you can. And so that also includes the questions. And also try.
That's a fascinating point about the two different decks, because I see too many people send the deck ahead of time and then read me the deck.
Yep.
I didn't need the pitch.
I already saw
the deck. I already know what the answer is.
Yeah.
I want to see something different that made me go, oh, wait a minute. No, I didn't know that. Or now, okay, this makes sense, versus just rereading it again when it's on the screen.
Exactly.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and also on the feedback or the questions part, if you are pitching a lot and sending this out and talking to a lot of VCs or having a lot of these conversations, if there's a question that keeps coming up, that means that maybe the deck isn't addressing it. Or so maybe that actually should be a slide, or maybe there's some more we need to put in here. And so again, that helps the deck work for you a little bit more, or it'll help you frame that conversation or the answer and help you again, articulate it better.
So this has been great. There's chock full of content. Maybe let's summarize this with something we can probably put on the web, which is if you had 3 pieces of advice, quick pieces of advice for a founder that's engaged in their first pitch deck, what would it be?
I would say, so this is, I don't want to say this is my advice, but it's something that's you hear a lot in startup circles, and it's if you want money, ask for advice, and if you want advice, ask for money. You should always be prepared to pitch and to talk about what it is you're working on, even if you're not looking for funding.
Right.
So cultivate relationships as early as you can, because you never know what doors those relationships are going to open or where they may lead. I would also say always follow up. Okay. So VCs especially, a lot of them, they love to be like, oh, I'm going to pass. This is not what I'm in. But down the road, like think who passed on Airbnb or who passed on Tesla.
Sure.
These, there's always VCs that passed on these, and they're gonna and a lot of them, some of the smarter firms, if you look, I forget the name of the firm now, but they have sort of their losers panel where they're really what's the word? They're really transparent and upfront about who they passed on.
I think it was at Andreessen Horowitz.
I think
they talk all about like, hey, we passed on these, which we need to remember so we don't miss things that we missed in the past.
But the smart founders will be, hey, appreciate the conversation. Do you mind if I stay in touch?
Yeah.
And they will send you those monthly updates.
Yeah.
And whether or not they're being read, you're staying relevant. You're staying top of mind to that VC that down the road, maybe, even if they passed on this venture, maybe they still want to introduce you to someone that will help you, or they know someone.
Or so you come top of mind and they just happen to run into somebody the night before, and just by chance, there's a door that opens because you just kept knocking.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't want to bang on it. They'll put you into spam, but you can knock.
Yeah, and so always follow up. Yeah. And I guess the third piece I would say is just be confident in your own storytelling ability, because like we mentioned, storytelling is very much a science at the same time as it is an art. So you can always improve and build on it and learn skills, but at the core is you as the founder and what it is that you're working on. And be very protective of that too, because you know your industry and you know the problem best. The same with this may stem into another conversation even, but you mentor on a lot of accelerators. You're dealing with a lot of founders. They're getting feedback and advice from everyone,
right.
whether or not they understand what it is they're working on, or they're familiar with the industry. And so I have founders even that where I'll counsel like on their presentation style or their decks, and I'm like, well, what have you been hearing? What have people been telling you? Because some of the things I may tell you today may be directly in conflict with feedback that you've gotten.
Right.
The same with founders will ask in VC circles, like, what's a good example of a pitch deck, or what should be in a pitch deck? They're going to get 20 different answers.
Right.
But going back to the story, it's a lot less of this. It's a lot less of that type of runaround and that type of conflicting advice, because the story again is where we should be starting from, like I mentioned.
Sure.
And that's where you should build out your most effective deck as it's going to be working for you.
Right.
Obviously, take advice and take feedback, but we mentioned the deck itself is a living, breathing entity,
right.
so it's going to look different even tomorrow than it does today,
right.
depending on who it is you're presenting to.
Right. I mean, I hear it. You know, we do mentor, go to these accelerators. One person can say, hey, here's my feedback on, your content, or you're missing this, or I wish I had more information. The next person get online and say, no, I thought the content was great, right? But to your point, the story, right, that's got to be basically unwavering, solid, because it's what the founders, that's what the essence of what they're communicating. Some
Sure.
of the detail stuff can change, and you're going to get feedback all day long about put this in, don't put this in.
Yeah.
Oh, you should say it this way, don't say it this way. But that story's got to be strong.
Yeah, and I'm a big nerd for story, obviously, and I'm also I'm a big space enthusiast, and so anyone working on stuff in outer space really excites me. But a lot of those people aren't the best storytellers.
Right.
They have really heavy science backgrounds,
Right.
or scientists, and if you actually go to some of these or you see some of these pitches, they are probably the most challenged sometimes with telling stories, because they want to start with the data and the numbers.
Yeah.
And if you're building, there was one here locally. They're building moon landing pods.
Yes, I've seen that one.
Yeah,
yeah.
And I met the founder. He's a great guy, but
Yeah.
he was in one of the.
He was in Tech Fuel.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I was like, dude, you have no story.
That's right.
Let's work on that.
It was like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
And it is cool, right?
Yeah.
But it didn't invoke any emotion.
Yeah, it's like you're
It was just,
building-
oh, that's really cool. You
Yeah,
haven't
you're-
built it yet. We're not there, but man, that's really cool.
Yeah, and I was like, you're building these landing pods on
Yeah.
the moon, and I didn't really get that until we were almost done.
Yeah.
And so
I know which one you're talking
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of that challenge in people with heavy scientific background.
Right.
Not to blame them, but it's also the way that those industries are structured.
Well, and it's interesting too is we already talked about Steve Jobs, right? But Wozniak was the brainiac. Well, they're both smart as can be, right? But he wasn't out there to be the guy that was invoking the essence of Apple. Really, it was a partnership. So sometimes that's another thing that I see is just like in every single team, you need to have team members that complement you, and some founders just can't do it.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Hire to your weaknesses to make now your team a strength.
Yeah.
To have the strength.
And
sometimes that's what has to happen, especially for some of these high tech, high scientific models. They need somebody else.
Exactly. And
to partner with.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because you're mentioning a lot of these founders who are visionary, very well known. And an example that I also give, because sometimes the question is, well, what's more important, story or the deck? And that's the wrong question to really ask. But an example I give is sort of the opposite. Is look at someone like Elizabeth Holmes.
Sure.
Where
Great Hulu show.
Yeah, I love that show. But I've studied that. I've studied her a lot, because look just how far she got.
Right.
Really on just story.
Yep.
There wasn't a lot that she showed, or she was able to really obscure a lot of this a lot of the details about what she was or what they weren't working on, really.
Right.
But look at the board she built. Look
Yep.
at all of these people that she basically fooled, basically on story.
Well, look at WeWork. I mean, another
Yeah.
one. We were just talking all these, business dramas that have come out over the last time, but another great story.
Yeah.
Right. Good. I mean, an interesting concept too. But
Sure.
what powered what was largely a real estate play was a vision and a story of
Yeah.
a community.
Yeah, and that gets into, it gets into a lot of other conversations,
Sure.
but it's part of it is being a visionary and getting people to rally behind your cause. There's people even now that say, like, if she had more time, she probably would have got it. I don't
Right.
know. But it's, that's speculation. But she was very effective in telling and communicating that vision.
Right.
And getting others to really rally behind that cause and support her in every step she went from there. So that's another great example of never try to deceive people, but learn the value of storytelling, particularly in how it relates to your vision, because that is also a huge part of that journey and also those relationships that you will cultivate down the road.
Well, Alfred, really appreciate you coming on today to talk to us about
Sure.
storytelling and the pitch deck. DeckSavvy, look them up. Again, you're highly sought after, so there's a waiting list, so you might want to do it now.
And I work closely with Cat at Active Capital.
Yeah,
of
and
course,
Active
everything,
Capital,
so.
which are great friends, of what we do here in this community. You're vital in this community. Your name comes up. I run into y'all, various places. Thank you for what you do to support the community as well. Thank you if you're listening here with us on Spotify. Leave us some feedback. Check the comments. Subscribe to us if you're watching us on YouTube or any of our other platforms. Same thing. Give us some feedback. Let us know if we're adding value to you. We appreciate you listening to us. We look forward to the next episode and talking soon. Thanks so much.